The purpose of this module is to discuss the screening process designed to determine whether or not a project is placed in the merger process. The screening process is applicable for Transportation Improvement Program projects that will have an environmental document prepared by the Project Development and Environmental Analysis Unit of NCDOT. Screening occurs to decide which projects will be placed into the merger process. Screening can occur any time after a project receives funding, is scheduled, and moves into planning. The screening process usually occurs after the Start of Study letter or the scoping letter goes out. Screening decisions are made by the project team leaders, consisting of NCDOT and U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, along with the North Carolina Department of Environment and Natural Resources and the Federal Highway Administration, and can be coordinated with the probable project team if appropriate. The project team leaders decide which projects go into the merger process using the screening criteria contained in the merger guidelines. The triggers to place a project into the merger process generally include the need for an individual permit based upon the anticipated wetland and stream impacts and/or potential impacts to two or more specified concern areas. The true objective of merger is twofold: to encourage early and often coordination on projects where the team feels a higher degree of coordination and study of various alternatives would benefit the project. This applies to projects that have competing resources, for example, historic resources versus wetlands, or relocations versus historic resources. Merger is also considered for controversial projects, both politically and from a stakeholder perspective, regardless of the type of permit that is anticipated from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. There are many basic widening projects and bridge replacement projects that easily hit the thresholds in the screening process but do not need to be in merger. The criteria in the merger screening process indicates when a screening meeting should be held and is not meant to be a hard line in the sand on which projects to place in merger and which to leave out. The project team leaders may take a project out of the merger process as well. This decision may be made on a variety of factors, for example, change in project scope, selection of alternatives, reduction in anticipated wetland and stream impacts, etc. The process owner agencies may request recommendations from other partnering agencies before the decision is made to take the project out of the merger process. Likewise, a project can be added to the merger process based on similar considerations. All of the decisions in and out of merger are recorded for documentation purposes. Note that it is better to place a project in the merger process early on and drop it than to leave it out and find out later it should be there. Merger will generally apply to new location projects and projects that require an individual permit under Section 404 of the Clean Water Act. There is substantial benefit in carrying projects through the merger process, but it requires a high degree of commitment of resources by the many agencies involved. The usual procedure would be for the process owners to meet prior to scheduling a concurrence Point 1 meeting to make a decision on merger. Note that the screening process is an informal process and there are no absolute thresholds. While there are no absolute thresholds, there are the general go-by thresholds. New location and widening projects are usually placed in the merger process if they require an individual permit or if they require a regional or nationwide permit, and if the project potentially impacts a critical water supply area or total direct impacts are greater or equal to 1 acre of wetlands or greater or equal to 500 feet of stream. For bridge replacements, the decision on whether to use merger or not depends on whether the project is a replace in place only with an off-site detour. If this is the case, the project is not placed in merger. The project may be placed in merger if an individual permit is required or it's likely to impact two or more of a list of resources, including wetlands, buffer rules, Coastal Area Management Act areas of environmental concern, threatened and endangered species, Section 4F, Section 106, environmental justice, high public controversy, high relocations, and compelling reasons to maintain traffic on site. Projects in merger can be removed. At each concurrence meeting, the project team should evaluate the need for the project to stay in the merger process. Projects not in merger can be added. If information becomes available on a non-merger project that warrants it being considered for placement in the merger process, the project team leaders will meet to determine if it should be placed in the merger and at what point based on the project status. It is better to err on placing a project in the process and later removing it than not doing so and having to potentially start over.